So this is the 5 secrets to understanding pivot tables webinar, Excel Campus webinar, and I'm super excited to have you joining us. My name is John Acampora, and I'll be your host today. So you're in the right spot. You showed up to the right meeting today. If you've heard that you need to learn pivot tables, but you're not exactly sure why, maybe this is a question that's come up on a job interview, or you spend a lot of time trying to summarize and analyze data with complex formulas. And as we all know, that can be difficult and frustrating. Or you've tried to use pivot tables, but you're just frustrated with the inconsistent results you're getting. Or you're using pivot tables now, maybe you've inherited a file from someone else, and you're just not really sure how they work, and you spend time guessing. Maybe pivot tables are kind of this mysterious thing for you in Excel, and you might be feeling kind of overwhelmed. Maybe your boss or bosses have a ton of projects for you to work on, or like I said before, you've experienced this question on a job interview. You're not exactly sure what a pivot table is and what it does and how it can benefit you in your job. So on today's agenda, we're going to cover the 5 secrets to understanding pivot tables. We're going to look at what a pivot table is and why they're such a magical tool in Excel. We'll look at the 4 different areas of the pivot table and what each of those does. We're going to also talk about the pivot table mechanics, kind of go behind the scenes of how they work to really understand what a pivot table is doing with our data. And then we're going to look at the critical step, the absolute critical step of getting the source data in the correct layout, and also the 8 rules for formatting your source data. So we have a lot to cover here. And one thing I ask is you can just hang around till the end and I'll send you this Excel file that I'm using today and also a guide. So today you can close down Excel, silence all the other distractions, close the email if you can, and just take some notes. Just follow along and take notes. And that way you won't fall behind. If you try and open Excel and follow along, it's hard to keep up with everyone's speed and you'll fall behind. So I recommend just tuning in today, and then you can go practice afterwards, and I'll provide all the files that'll help you do that. And I'll also be answering questions at the end of today's session. So stick around for that as well. If you have questions and they come up during the training, you put them in that Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll get to those at the end of the training. So quickly introduce myself. Again, my name is John Acampora. I've spent most of my career as a financial analyst doing corporate finance and accounting type roles. I started the Excel Campus blog back in 2010, and also our YouTube channel to help others learn Excel and VBA. And in that time, it's grown massively. We have over 100,000 subscribers on both platforms. I've had the opportunity to teach millions of people about pivot tables, and I'm super excited about this topic. I've also been a Microsoft Excel MVP since 2014. That's an award program that Microsoft gives out. And one of the benefits there is I get to communicate with the product team at Microsoft and see future updates come to the product, also give them feedback, give them your feedback as well. So great program there. And of course, I love Excel and use it all day, every day. It's my life when I'm in front of a computer. So enough about me. Let's go ahead and get started with the training. So the first secret to understanding pivot tables is to understand what a pivot table is and how it can help us with our job. Sometimes kind of this mysterious term, pivot table. So I'm going to jump over to Excel now, and I have this file. Again, I'll make this file available for you after the training so you can try this out yourself. But the first thing I'm going to do is just create a pivot table. I'm just going to create a pivot table, pivot chart, and kind of an interactive report or dashboard here to just show off what a pivot table can do. So the first thing we're going to do is start with this data over here, this set of data. And I consider this source data. This could be data you export from a report, general ledger system, your ERP system, or something like that. In this case, we just have sales transactions. So each row here is one sales transaction. We have an invoice number here, a date column, year, quarters, customer name, region, product, quantity, and a revenue column. So it's always good to kind of study your data, see what data points we have. And so the first thing we're going to do is just select a cell inside that table there, go to the Insert tab and choose Pivot Table. And that'll bring up this window here that'll allow us to create a pivot table. So we're going to select the table arrange. Since I'm using an Excel table, it's already defaulted to the table name there and selected the range. You can kind of see that in the background with those marching ants around the range. And then we're going to select the location we want it. In this case, we're going to put it in an existing worksheet. And I'm just going to put it over here in cell K5. I typically put it in a new worksheet, but for this demo, I'm going to put in an existing worksheet. Right now, we're just going to leave this blank. This is Power Pivot in the data model, and we don't need that right now. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And that'll add our pivot table here into the sheet. You can see this pivot table area right here. And we also have the pivot table fields list open up over here in this task pane. And this is the command center for the pivot table. This is where we build out the pivot table. So I'm just going to quickly build out a pivot table to show what this can do. And what the whole goal of the pivot table is to summarize our data and create a report. So the first thing I'm going to do is take our region field. These are the columns within our source data. Take that region field and put it in the rows area. And that gives me a list of all of my regions. So again, if we go here to the region column, we can see those regions are repeating quite a bit in this table. But here in my pivot table, I just get a unique list of all those regions. So I have that in the rows area. And then in the values area, I'm just going to put the revenue field in there. And that's instantly going to give me a sum of revenue for each region. So you can see we're just building a summary report here. And don't worry, I'm going very fast here, and I'm going to explain how this all works throughout the training. But I first just want to give you an idea of what a pivot table does, so you can kind of understand how powerful they are and what a useful tool they are. And so now I'm also want to maybe see this by a trend, a time trend. So I'm going to take my quarter field and put it in the columns area. And I now have this report that shows me sum of revenue by region by quarter. So very quickly we can start building out this report. And then I might also want to have a filter on this. So I'm going to take my product field, put it in the filters area. And this allows me to filter the entire table by a specific item or a specific product. So maybe we only want to see this report for product 2. Go ahead and hit OK there. And that'll filter my entire report for just product 2. So you can see how flexible this is. We can also make changes here. Maybe we don't want those quarters across the top. We can easily remove that from our pivot table, and it's instantly updated right here. So very flexible tool with the pivot table and creating summary reports and analysis. And we're not just limited to sum. There is other metrics we can calculate: count, average, max, min, and even more options. We can also do show values as, percentage of totals, differences, so running totals, all kinds of metrics we can calculate instead of just sum. But we'll keep it simple for now and leave it as sum of revenue. And the next thing we're going to do is create a pivot chart. So we're going to create a very simple interactive dashboard here pretty quickly. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab here. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go to the Analyze tab on the ribbon. This might say Options if you're in Excel 2010. And we're going to choose a pivot chart. And then, of course, we get a list of all of our chart choices. We're just in the Insert Chart menu. We'll just do this clustered column for now. And click OK. So that's just created a chart here in our sheet. But this is a pivot chart, which is a special type of chart that's actually connected to our pivot table. So as we make changes to the pivot table, maybe we change this filter to product 1 instead, that will also apply that filter and make those changes to the pivot chart. So it becomes connected and interactive. And another way to make that even more interactive is with slicers. So I'm also going to add some slicers. So we can go to the Insert tab here, and then we're just going to choose Slicer. And slicers are like filters. So we might want to do slicers for a year, quarter, and also that product. We can add as many as we want, but that'll just add those 3 slicers right here. Of course, you might want to take some time to line them up, resize them, do all that fun stuff. But now we have these slicers, and this makes our chart and our pivot table interactive. So as we click these slicers, both the chart and the pivot table will be filtered. There we go. And so we could maybe want that for product 2, maybe we'll clear that filter, and so on. So you can see within just a matter of minutes here, we've created this interactive dashboard and report. And of course, we could add more pivot tables, we could add more charts to this to really create an interactive report. But the power here is all with the pivot table. So hopefully that gives you a quick explanation there, a quick understanding of what a pivot table is. Again, I went real quick, and we're going to dive into this and look at it a little more. So let me jump back to PowerPoint. There we go. There we go. So as we said, pivot tables are a very powerful tool because they allow us to quickly summarize the data to create interactive reports and dashboards. And some great benefits of learning pivot tables. If you've seen some of my YouTube videos, you might have seen Andy before. He's here on the right, and he's learning pivot tables too. Like I said, they help us summarize and analyze data quickly. They also help us discover new insights about our data because we can easily answer the boss's questions, and we don't have to create or maintain complex formulas to create these summary reports. So this saves us a ton of time with Excel. And these are definitely skills that employers are looking for. Like I said before, there's always a question on a job interview about pivot tables, and now hopefully you can start to see why. So learning pivot tables will obviously help you become that Excel superstar, that Excel guru of the office. So what are some misconceptions about pivot tables? Maybe some things that might scare you, some myths about pivot tables. One is that other people won't be able to use my files. I've heard this before. Definitely not true. We can actually make our files much easier to use when we use slicers and pivot tables and interactive tools like that. Another kind of drawback I've heard is that we're stuck with that pivot table layout formatting. Also not true. We have 3 different options for the layout and then a ton of options for each of those layouts within pivot tables. And then if you still want something very customized, we can also use what's called the get pivot data function to create a very customized and interactive spreadsheet outside of the pivot table. Another misconception is it's difficult to update with new data. We can completely automate that process, and we'll look at that today a little bit with Power Query as well. Another myth I hear is that it increases my file size. That can be true, but there are ways around that as well. And that's typically not an issue unless you have really large files with a lot of data. And for something like that, we can use Power Pivot and the data model. So there's options. That's my point there. Another misconception is that it's not as easy as it looks, and it doesn't work with my data. So what are some of these hesitations or struggles that you have? You can put in the chat just one of these numbers if any of these rings true for you, or if it's something else, you could type in the chat there as well. Just keep it short though. But yeah, so I see, I'm seeing a lot of 5s. Yeah, definitely. Okay, 5s, ton of 5s. Okay, so yes. Okay, some 3s. I see some 3s and 2s. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for voting. That's awesome. So yes, the number one issue with learning pivot tables is number 5. Well, that tends to be what it is. If it's not for you, that's cool. But it's that they look easy, but pivot tables don't work with my data, right? That can always be kind of the frustrating thing. As I see John do it on this webinar, it looks super easy, but when I go try it with my data, it doesn't work. Yeah. That's it. So my goal is to help make pivot tables easier for you, kind of make them push button easy for you to understand. So that gets us into secret number 2, which is understanding the pivot table areas. So we have these 4 areas on the right where we can drag the fields into, and that can be confusing, like which field do I put in which area? Sometimes that causes a lot of frustration and you spend a lot of time guessing which one. So the point here is that the 4 areas of the pivot table are not created equal. They all do different things. Each of these 4 areas do almost completely different things. And so we're going to jump back into Excel, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about the different areas. So first of all, I have this diagram, and I'm going to send this to you as well in the cheat sheet that I send after the webinar, so you can study this diagram. But this just kind of shows where when you drag fields into each of those areas, what happens to the pivot table within the spreadsheet. So that's a little cheat sheet, a little diagram there. But let's go into an actual explanation of the different areas. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, we have our same data set here on this sheet. I'm just going to, again, insert another pivot table just so you can see that process in the insert tab of the ribbon. And we're going to do this on an existing sheet. I'll put it over here in, let's see, maybe cell M5. We'll do that. Hit OK. So we have our pivot table over here, and I want to explain the different areas. The first area we're going to start with is the values area. So again, over here in the pivot table fields list, we have those 4 areas, and we're going to look at the values area. And I'm going to take the field we want to use for that is typically a field that contains a number. It doesn't have to be, but in this case, we're going to use the revenue field, and we're going to drag it into the values area. And again, that instantly calculates a sum of revenue. And that's a sum of revenue for that entire revenue column. So this column here in our data set, If we were to go down to the bottom, just going to hit Control down arrow, we could see that this number, this sum of this column is 76414. And if we go back up to our pivot table, that's exactly what we get here. So the values area is just going to do the calculation. It's really a calculation engine within the pivot table. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to remove that out of the values area for now, sum of revenue. I'm just going to remove that. And we're going to explain the rows area. I'm going to look at the rows area. So with the rows area, I'm going to take first the region field and put that in the rows area. And again, that's created that list of unique values from the region column. So it's gone over here to the region column of our source data, and we have all these repeating values here, all these duplicate values. And that's absolutely fine for the source data of a pivot table. We want those repeating values because the pivot table will just give us a list of unique values so we can do that summary report. So basically kind of like doing a sum ifs formula. If you've ever done a sum ifs or count ifs formula, something like that. It's like that, but much, much faster and easier. So that's what the rows area does. It gives us that list of unique values. Now it also helps us create relationships between multiple fields. And what I mean by that is if we were to take the product field and also put it in the rows area, I'm going to put it under the region. We can now see that we have two fields here in our rows area, region and product. And over in our pivot table, what we're now seeing is all the products sold for each region. So these are the products that were sold in the East region only. In the Midwest region, we had additional products sold. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then Northeast region, we had all 6 products sold there. So this is creating that relationship between those two fields and showing that or displaying that in the pivot table. So this gives us more insights on our data. We can quickly see which products were sold where. And we can also change that. So if we put product on top of region, we can now see all the products and which regions those products were sold in. So product 1 was sold in all 4 regions, same with product 2. Product 3 was only sold in 3 of the regions. So you can see this makes it very dynamic, very easy to create different views of our data. And then of course with the pivot table, if we were to then take the revenue field and move it back into the values area, we're going to get a sum of revenue for all of these data points. And you can see when I do that how quickly this happens. I just drag and drop and instantly, because Excel is amazing, we instantly get this sum of revenue for all of these data points, for all these cross sections of data. Product 1, East region within product 1, and so on. So it's amazingly powerful. Now the columns area is similar to the rows area, but the difference between with the columns area is that we're going to get a horizontal layout. So typically we'll put something like a time period across the top of our reports. You don't have to, you can put any field you want in the columns area, but I'm going to start with quarters, put that in the columns area. And so now in our pivot table, we're seeing the quarters across the top. And again, we're just seeing that list of unique values from the quarter column. So we still have this vertical column of data over here, and the pivot table is still going to go through that vertical column and just give us the list of unique values there, and then display it horizontally in the columns area. So even though we're showing this horizontally in the report, the data, the source data, is still in a vertical layout. We're going to talk more about that source data, but that's an important point to understand there. And then finally, the filters area, again, allows us to filter the entire table. So maybe instead of having the product down here in the rows area, we could keep that there, or we can move it up to the filters area. And then we can filter this entire report for a specific item, specific product in this case. And so we get this filter drop-down menu up here in the filters area for this field. We can also select multiple items here. If we wanted to see the report for products 1 and 2, we could do something like that, or we can just change it to product 1, and then we get the entire report filtered for that specific item. And we can have multiple fields in any of the areas, including the filters area. Any of the areas there, you can put multiple fields to help make the pivot table show what you want, can make it more advanced, more complex if you want. Of course, you want to keep it as simple as possible, but you have just about unlimited freedom there and opportunity with creating reports very, very quickly. So Yeah, so great. Okay, I see a few questions coming in, and you can put those in the Q&A box as well. If you did put them in the chat, there's a Q&A box where you can put the questions, and that way at the end of the webinar, I will definitely go over your questions. But feel free to put those in the Q&A box. It'll be much easier for me to see them there. The chat box has thousands of chats in it. So that's an overview of the pivot table areas. And again, I'll be sending you this guide that kind of explains each of these in more detail, each area there in more detail. But the point there is that they're not all created equal. And so that leads us to secret number 3, which is understanding how pivot tables filter and calculate the source data. Again, another important concept with pivot tables. So we're going to look at the pivot table mechanics here and how pivot tables actually work. So, oops, let's go jump into Excel there. Giving away my secrets or tips or secrets. So we're going to look at how pivot tables work. And what I'm going to do is open a new window. So View tab, if you've never done this before, View tab, new window. This is going to open the same Excel workbook. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, which is Windows plus arrow key to the right. Oops, Windows plus arrow key to the right. Maybe not. My mouse went a little crazy there. There we go. And we'll open these side by side. And then I also have, oh, there we go. Also have a pivot table here. So same workbook, just open side by side. I have a video that explains how to do that in more detail. But what we have over here is we have the source data, and then on a separate sheet, we have the pivot table for that source data there. So what we're going to do is just create a pivot table, and I'm going to explain how this filters and calculates our data. There we go. Yeah. So we're going to put, again, just build this pivot table out. We're going to, here, let me move this over again. We're going to put the region in the rows area. It's the same pivot table we've seen before, and we're going to put revenue in the values area. So now what we have is a sum of revenue by region. But what the pivot table is actually doing here when it's creating this report is it's applying a filter to the source data. So this would be the same as if we were to go over here to our source data and apply a filter for just the East region, and then sum up the revenue for just that for that column, for that filtered data. So we could see that the sum of revenue for just the East region is 6720, and that's exactly what we see here in the pivot table. Same thing if we were to filter this for Midwest, do a filter there, and then this pivot table would calculate and give us that total for the Midwest region. Now this is a very simple example, but it's important to understand that this is exactly what the pivot table is doing, and it does this in memory. It's not actually going over here and applying all these filters to our source data range on the sheet. It does that in memory, but this is how the pivot table calculates. And that's important because as the pivot table gets more complex, of course, those filters are also, we're going to have multiple filters on the source data range. So for example, if we then had quarters in the columns area and we have some numbers here, let's say we have this Q4 number. I'm going to go ahead and close the pivot table fields list. That's the close button there for it. We have this number 5640. So how does the pivot table calculate that? Well, it just goes to the source data range. It's going to filter this for the East region. There we go. And Q4 only for the quarter column. And then we'll get that total 5640. It's exactly what we see here in our pivot table. So that's how the pivot table works. And it's important to understand that because that will help us determine what layout we need our source data in. As you can see, this is all a vertical process of filtering and calculating. We're applying filters in this vertical fashion to this data set. So all the filtering is done vertically. Even though we have data laid out here horizontally in our pivot table, all the source data is, as you can see, in a vertical format. So it's very important to understand this. And as you practice with pivot tables, you'll start to understand this a bit more as well. So that leads us to secret number 4, which is that it's all about the source data layout, the layout of the source data. As you can see, I have a little preview here of a correct layout and an incorrect layout. and we'll take a look at that and get into some details, because it's all about this source data layout. And it doesn't matter what type of data you have. It could come from some kind of database, general ledger system, an export from an online system or something like that. Any type of financial or accounting data, doesn't matter where this data comes from, it's all about the source data. It must be in the correct layout for the pivot table. So let's look at some examples. There we go. All right, let me make this full screen again. Take a quick drink. So let's take a look at some examples of source data. So I just showed this on the PowerPoint, and this is the correct layout, which is typically called a tabular format. That tabular is, I believe, Latin for the word table, which means we want a table, and that just means we want one row, a single row of headers here across the top, and then rows of data below that. So one row of headers and then rows of data below that. A report like this is actually the incorrect layout for the source of a pivot table. You might get data exported from a system that looks like this, maybe some kind of reporting system, or your software spits out something like this with months or quarters across the top, or years, or some other data point across the top or category. And this is not the correct layout for the source data of a pivot table. Of course, we can fix that, so don't worry if this is just how you get your data and you have no control over that. Maybe you can't have IT change it, or that would take a long time. We can change that. We can fix that. And I'm going to show a simple example. But really, the basic rule here with the source data is that all of the values of the same type must be in one column. And we typically will start with the values. So when I say values, those are the numeric values that we're looking at in the report, the data points of the report. In this report over here, we have all these revenue numbers within all of these cells here, and these actually need to be in one single column. So this is going to make our table a lot longer and skinnier, which is fine. That's absolutely fine. That's what a pivot table wants. And as you can see, these numbers have been transposed or just listed over here in this column. So that's kind of the first step when transforming your source data to this layout here. And then once we have that, we then have additional columns that will describe that data point. So if we just look at one single data point here, we've taken this data point, 2010, moved it over to this sales column, and then all of these other categories that are describing that data point, like the product, the month, the company, the region, those will now all go into the same row in columns next to that data point. It doesn't have to be to the right or the left, that doesn't matter. We're just really saying that this one row, or what's called a record set in database terminology, these are describing this data point right here, 2010. So that's how we transform this. Now, fortunately, we don't have to drag and drop our data like this. We don't have to do that kind of like drag and drop or some manual effort to get our data looking like this. We now have tools in Excel that help us with this tremendously. And one of those is Power Query. So Power Query is a relatively new tool for Excel. It was released as an add-in by Microsoft in Excel 2010, and it's now, since in Excel 2016 and Office 365, it's now in Excel. It's now fully integrated and part of Excel. It's called Power Query, or also called Get and Transform, and it's on the Data tab of the ribbon now. So I'm on Office 365, which is the latest version of Excel, and we now have Get and Transform here in the Data tab of the ribbon, and this is Power Query. They've renamed it to Get and Transform, but this is Power Query. And so I want to show a simple example of using Power Query to do this transformation. So this will just kind of give you an idea and show you these tools that are now available to us to do this process. And it can be also a bigger process of updating and automating your data, or automating and updating all that process, that complex process. We can totally automate all of that. So let's take a look. Let's just take a look at Power Query. So I have this, again, simple, very simple table. And of course, your data is going to be way more complex, so there's going to be more of it than this. But for this one, I'm just going to show a simple example to make it easy to see. And again, we have this data that's in the wrong layout. We have the months across the top here. And if we were to create a pivot table based on this, then we get fields for all of these different months in the pivot table areas, or I'm sorry, in the pivot table fields list. And we wouldn't be able to sum up total revenue. It'd just be very limiting on what we can create with this. But fortunately, we can use Power Query to unpivot this. So we're going to just select any cell inside this table here. Again, data tab in the ribbon, and we're going to choose from table. If you're on an older version of Excel, you can still get Power Query. I have an article that explains that in more detail. And oops, opened the wrong window. There we go. Let me bring it over here. There we go. Okay, so this is what's called the Power Query Editor. You can see that at the top of the window here. This opens on top of Excel, and it's a new window. If you haven't seen Power Query before, don't worry about it. New window with new buttons, and these new buttons help us transform our data, clean it up, get it ready for pivot tables, reporting, financial modeling, basically anything you're doing. If you're bringing data into Excel from some other system, sometimes you can connect directly to that system with Power Query, and if not, you can you bring it in from a CSV file or something like that, and this will bring it into Excel and allow us to clean it up. So we have our data here, just a preview of our data. And for this simple example, we're going to unpivot it. So I'm just going to select the January column, hold Shift, select the April column. So I have all these columns selected. I'm going to go to the Transform tab here, and we're going to choose this Unpivot Columns button. Simple button, one click is going to do all that work for us. You can see it's unpivoted the data. We now have this attribute column, which we can, I'll just double click and rename that to month. There we go, hit enter. And then we have our value column. I'm going to double click and rename that to revenue. And so now we have this data in the right format, the right layout for a pivot table. It's this vertical format that again allows us to filter and calculate the data. So we got our data in the right layout. The cool part about Power Query too is just real quick, I won't go into full tutorial on Power Query, but over here you can see these steps that we did, the applied steps, and we can actually step through these and just click them. Here's what our original data looked like over here. This was an automatic data type transformation. Then we did an unpivot columns, that step right there, and then we renamed those columns. So you can go back and see your steps, you can delete steps, add steps. This is a full automation tool with Power Query. And then when we're done with that, we go to the Home tab on the ribbon, and we're just going to click this Close and Load button. And that's going to add a new sheet to our workbook with the output. There we go. It'll take a second here. Right? With my computer running the webinar software, it's a little slow. There we go. So there's our output. And the important thing to understand here is that this is not transforming or modifying the original data set. So if we go back here to our sales data sheet, here's our original data set here. And what Power Query is doing is just doing that transformation in memory and then outputting this to this new table. So once we have that set up, we can also use this as an automation tool. And what I mean by that is, let's say next month we get some new data. I'm just going to go over to the sales data sheet here. We can pretend we pasted it in, but I'm just going to, let's just see if we can do this. We'll just add some new rows and pretend like we're adding some new rows here with some new data in it, same numbers, but we get new product numbers, so that's cool. If we go over to Power Query, all we have to do now is right click, or I'm sorry, if we go over to this table, this is the Power Query output, we go over to this table and right click refresh, we're now going to get our new data down here at the bottom of this table. So we have that transformations done for us. So all we have to do every week or every month is just right click refresh. And then if we have a pivot table that's built with this, so we can we'll just quickly create a pivot table here. Let's put it on a new sheet. If we have a pivot table that's based off of this, maybe we want product, sum of revenue by product, something like that. Every time we get that new data, we can refresh our query, then come in here, right click, refresh the pivot table, and everything will be updated. So you don't have to do this, you don't have to recreate this every week if this is a process you're doing. You just come into the workbook, right click refresh, or you can go to the data tab refresh all, and that'll do all the refreshes for you. And you'll have an updated report, updated data, and all that kind of stuff, transformed data and all that. So that's just a quick preview of Power Query. Again, if you have questions about it, if it's the first time you're seeing it and your mind's exploding, mine did too when I first saw it, that's totally cool. Just put those questions in the Q&A box and not the chat. That way I'll be able to see them, because there's a lot of stuff in the chat, and I won't be able to get to all of it. So if you can put that in the Q&A box, that'd be awesome, and I'll answer questions after the training. I'm trying to go not too fast, but I want to cover a lot too, so I know it's hard to go at the right pace for everyone. But yeah, if you have questions, just let me know. So that was Power Query and some source data examples. Oh, one other real quick source data example I want to show is actual versus budget. So if you have a report that's a little more complex, looks like this, where you have actual and budget columns, we can also use Power Query to unpivot that. Or you might have more than two columns. You might have actual budget forecast, variances. You might have more stuff, but you can also use Power Query to unpivot that. And this is what that data should look like for the source of a pivot table. We should have actuals and budget in two separate columns. And so the rule there is that the column, you always want to be able to add that entire column to a meaningful number. So this would be total actuals at the bottom here, 489, total budget at the bottom. If all of those numbers were in one column, that would not be a meaningful number, it'd be a confusing number. So that's kind of the rule there. And I have a cheat sheet for you on that as well. So yeah, that's called unpivoting or normalizing the source data. Normalizing, again, is probably more of a database term, but that's what we're doing there. So if you have data that's in the incorrect layout, my whole point here, the most critical thing with learning pivot tables and understanding them is getting that source data right. If it's not in the right layout, pivot table's not going to work for you. Or it's not going to work well. You can still create a pivot table on that data. It's not going to work well. And like I said, there's kind of that cheat sheet on that all values of the same metric must be in a single column. So if you have actuals versus budget or some other two other numbers that are kind of different data points, then you can have them in different columns. Still do that. Set up with Power Query. And so this was kind of my light bulb moment with pivot tables. I didn't fully understand how pivot tables worked when I first saw them. And you might be the same way. It definitely took me a lot of time with a lot of trial and error to kind of understand them. But once I understood that source data is key, I was then able to reverse engineer reports that we were getting out of different financial systems and get the source data in the correct layout. And once you do that, that really unlocks a lot of potential with pivot tables. You can just not just summary reports, but you can do a ton of other stuff. And this helps us create relationships with other tables for things like date and category groupings, using lookup formulas like VLOOKUP. You can also create those relationships with Power Pivot and just go beyond kind of this basic summary reports that we've seen today. There's a lot of things we can do with pivot tables. We can even compare data from multiple data sets. So a ton of things. Pivot tables are really the magic and the power behind all kinds of data tools and business intelligence tools. And so understanding this theory. So that leads to secret number 5, which is that pivot tables are picky. The data needs to be cleaned up and formatted properly. This is another issue that you might have with pivot tables. And I love this picture of this kid staring at his vegetables, because I think it really kind of relates to what pivot tables are like as well, if they were a kid that had to eat vegetables. So anyways, I have another checklist for you with the 8 rules for formatting your source data. I'm gonna send this to you as well as part of the bonus files. And this just kind of goes over it here. We'll jump into Excel and I'll show a little before and after, but these 8 different rules for just cleaning up your data to get it in the right formatting for the use with a pivot table. So I'll jump over to Excel and show that. There we go. So this is on the left side here, kind of just raw data you might get from, again, export from a system, CSV file, something like that. And you can see here that we have a few issues with this data. We have some dates stored as text here. If you click the little error box here, you can see that we can need to convert these to an actual date. Same with this quantity column here. We have numbers stored as text in this case. We might need to convert those to a number. So I have that cheat sheet that has 8 of those steps. I won't necessarily go through all of those. There's different tools you can use in Excel for this, including Power Query, and to just get your source data cleaned up. And of course, usually your data doesn't require all 8 of those steps or all 8 of those rules. It's usually just 1 or 2 that you might have to clean up to get your source data looking right. Because with the pivot table, we want to make sure that we have the data in the right formatting for the data so the pivot table can read it. And usually it's the data types like dates. Pivot table can actually read the date and then do things with it, like group dates into months and years and quarters. Same, of course, with numbers. We want to be able to do aggregations or calculations on those numbers. So we want to make sure they're numbers and not text. We want to remove blank columns, remove blank rows, do a lot of those different types of cleanup work to get that source data looking right. So that's another very critical step here with using these as a source of a pivot table. And then one other thing I highly encourage you to do is use Excel tables. So this here is an Excel table, and this is just format as an Excel table. Once you have your data all cleaned up, you can just go Insert tab and choose a table. And then you can see here, since this isn't cleaned up, we have blank rows and stuff. Excel thinks this is all of our table right here. So we'd want to clean all that up, make sure it's selecting everything we have here, and then we can insert a table. And this is an Excel table. When we insert a table, we get the design tab of the ribbon appear up here. We can change the formatting of the table, different table styles, all that kind of cool stuff. But really, there's more power to a table than just that. And when we use it as the source of a pivot table, we don't have to worry about updating our source data range with the pivot table when we add new data. So what I mean by that is I have a quick example. I'll just show this real quick. If we had like some more data here and we wanted to add this data to our existing pivot table. So I'm just going to hit Control-C to copy it. And I'm going to go over to that first sheet we had here. And if we just put our data at the bottom right here, I'm just going to paste it to the bottom of this table. Just paste it right there. Since I'm using an Excel table here, my table has automatically been extended to include that new data. So we don't have to do anything here. It's just, you can see the table is extended all the way down, and we have it all the way here at the bottom of this new data, and the data is already included in there, which means with the pivot table that we have connected to this, if we just select a cell inside the pivot table there, go to the Analyze tab and choose Change Data Source. The data source for this pivot table is the entire table. If we didn't not use an Excel table and we just had a regular range here, every time we added new data, we'd have to go in here and update this range to the last row where our new data is. And I've made this mistake in my career more times than I'd like to admit with not updating this. And then you might send out a report. Even if you refresh the pivot table, it's not going to include the new data in there, and you're sending out old numbers. And so using a table, an Excel table, eliminates all that, because again, if we go, we go there, change data source, we're including the entire table here in the reference for that range. As you can see here, select a table or a range. In this case, we're using a table. So anytime we add data to it, that's included in our pivot tables and our pivot charts and everything. So now those numbers have updated. We have new numbers here, and everything's updated. We have a new year here. Everything's, it's not yet. We have to right click, refresh our pivot table. Right click, refresh. There we go. Now it's updated. Let me also close some of these panes. Another little quick tip here is if you accidentally close the pivot table fields list over here on the right side, you can hit this close button here to close it to get it out of your way. That's totally fine. To get it back, just right click on a pivot table and choose show field list, and that'll bring it back. So this is a toggle that turns that on and off. There's also a button on the Analyzer Options tab for that. But I find the fastest way is just right click a pivot table, hide or show field list right here, and that'll get it back so you can see it and again modify your pivot table. So yeah, that's using tables as a source of a pivot table. Again, I highly encourage you to do that. If you've used tables before and you don't like those weird formulas that they create, those are called structured reference formulas, where you might see the column name like this. You can turn that off. That's an application feature or setting that you can turn off, so you don't have those structured reference formulas if you don't like those. Actually very useful for writing formulas, but again, you don't have to use those. But I highly encourage you, if you're already using pivot tables, or if you've inherited a workbook that contains pivot tables and they might not be using tables as a source data range, I would encourage you to look into modifying that and creating that table. It'll just make life easier for you in the future. Yeah, so that was source data formatting. And like I said, that source data has to be just right, because pivot tables are looking for that nice, clean stack of data. I love this picture because I feel like this is what a pivot table is looking for. Like this kid here staring down this stack of cookies. That's exactly what a pivot table wants, is a nice, clean, sweet stack of data that it can easily consume. So it's got to be all cleaned up and looking good for the pivot table to be able to work with it. And unfortunately, Excel kind of leaves us with a different explanation of the rules for this, which is that if you try and insert a pivot table and it has blank columns, this is the error message you get. It doesn't exactly say that your data has blank columns in this error message, so that can be confusing. Sometimes the values default to count instead of sum. That happens when you have text in your values column or blanks. Excel's getting better at that, but that can be one reason. The group field button can also be disabled if you have text in your date columns or numeric columns, something like that. So Excel kind of leaves us to trial and error to figure out what's wrong when some of these features of the pivot table don't work the way we want them to. So my advice there is to kind of do it right the first time by cleaning up that source data. And of course, that'll make it easier to create the pivot table report, unlock additional features like date grouping, auto sum instead of count, prevent errors and incorrect results. And like I said before, I think it's extremely important to use Excel tables as a source data. Also, when we're using Power Query there, that output from Power Query is an Excel table. It's output into an Excel table already for you. And then you can just use that as a source of the pivot table. So here's just a quick recap of the 5 steps. We first looked at how pivot tables help us summarize and analyze the data quickly. We looked at the 4 different areas of the pivot table, how they're not all created equal. We also looked at how the pivot tables filter and calculate the source data. So remember how it does that vertical filtering. Very important concept there that will really help you make sure your source data is in the right layout. Of course, step number 4 is absolutely critical to get that source data in the right layout. It's really, really important there. And then step number 5 was to make sure that we're also formatting the data properly. A lot to do with data types there and blanks and numbers instead of text. And I'll send you that 8-step guide to help get you all that data cleaned up. So not exactly sure why I showed up here today. Maybe it's that learning pivot tables has always been on your to-do list, but you didn't know where to start. Or you've tried pivot tables, but you just feel like they don't work for you and you get frustrated. I know I was that way when I started with them. Or you've seen pivot tables on a job description or in interviews and you didn't know how to answer those questions or prepare for that. Or you just want to take your career to the next level and become that go-to Excel person in the office. So I feel like this is one skill, one Excel skill that can really help skyrocket your career, because obviously employees are looking for people that can analyze data quickly. There's no shortage of data in today's world, and we want people that can be able to efficiently produce results that matter to the organization, that help the organization. So pivot tables, as we saw, allow us to create interactive reports and dashboards in minutes instead of days or weeks that are very fast. They're also the gateway to other business intelligence tools like Power Pivot and Power BI. So if you've heard of these tools, but you're not exactly sure what they do, the underlying principles there are all pivot tables. It's all what we saw today with getting that source data in the right layout. And then these tools can then consume that data and do much more advanced analytics on it between multiple data sets. So that's the idea with Power Pivot and Power BI. and learning pivot tables will help you with those tools, help you get started with those tools. So I really feel like you can definitely change your career path, obviously make more money, and just become that Excel go-to person, that Excel guru in the office when you learn pivot tables. So I've created a system that makes learning pivot tables easy and fun. You just have to decide which path you want to take. You can do the trial and error, endless internet search, pull your hair out method like I did, or the simple step-by-step practice, improve, and conquer method to just have a clear guided path to get you up that mountain, that learning journey. So I've created a course, it's called the Pivot Ready course, and it will help take you from beginner to a pivot tables master. And the Pivot Ready course is designed to help you learn pivot tables quickly using my simple step-by-step training method that makes learning easy and fun. We like to have fun. And I believe it's the fastest way to learn pivot tables and really improve your Excel skills. So this is an online video course, which means you can take the course anytime you want, watch it on any device, get 24/7 access. There's 8 self-paced training modules. Self-paced means you can go at your own speed, watch the videos at your own pace. There's no time schedule for this course or anything like that. There's over 60 short videos. Each of those videos is 5 to 10 minutes in length. And of course, there's support from me and your peers within the course as well. And so here's the 8 training modules. Plus there's a bonus module on slicers as well. But here's the 8 training modules to get you learning pivot tables, how to do the formatting, the calculations, analyzing the data. We also look at Power Query, how to automate your data transformations with Power Query, adding more data. If that's a weekly or monthly process for you, we look at all of that. And then also grouping dates. So if your company's on a fiscal calendar, we cover that as well, how to analyze that in a pivot table and do all those date groupings for fiscal quarters and fiscal years, and then pivot table filtering techniques. So, and I also have 2 free bonus courses included with this. One is on combining data with Power Query, which will help you if you have data in multiple workbooks or multiple worksheets and you want to bring that all together and combine it and then create a pivot table and summary reports off of all of that data. It's in separate places. It can be in separate CSV files too. It doesn't have to be Excel files. We have a course on that. That'll be a free bonus. And an intro to Power Pivot. So if you've heard about Power Pivot, you're not sure exactly what it is, I have a course that will get you started with Power Pivot. Very powerful tool, really just taking pivot tables and putting them on steroids with DAX measures and DAX formulas and all that fun stuff. So you're probably interested in what the course costs. Right now you can get instant access to the Pivot Ready course bundle, the entire course bundle for $297, or today I'm going to run a special offer and you can get it for free when you join my new membership program, which is called Elevate Excel. So this is a brand new program I'm launching today, and you can get this entire course bundle for free when you join Elevate, this new program. So what's Elevate all about? Well, Elevate is a comprehensive beginner to advanced Excel training program. So this is my step-by-step system that will really help improve your skills, your Excel skills, regardless of your current skill level. So no matter where you're at with Excel, maybe you saw the training today on pivot tables and you think, well, I could probably use some other training before I get into pivot tables on formulas and that kind of stuff. Or maybe you're looking for something more than that, beyond just pivot tables. This program will help with all of that. There's also a community forum with this program, so you can interact with other members, and quite a few more features. So how does it work? Well, the first thing we'll do is give you an initial assessment or quiz to determine where you're at with Excel, because we're all at different skill levels with Excel, and we've all kind of defined in our head what that skill level means. So we'll kind of assess you and place you within the course to give you a clear guide or a clear roadmap on what you should learn next. Because a lot of people come to us and say, I don't know what to learn next. I want to learn more advanced stuff. I want to learn intermediate stuff. I don't know what to learn next. So we're going to figure all this out for you to decide where you're at now and then where you need to go next to really elevate your Excel skills. So that means we divided the training into 4 different stages from beginner to advanced. So the 4 stages are: stage 1, I call the rookie or the light user. If you don't use Excel a lot, this would be kind of starting out, just give you the basics of Excel, navigating Excel, formatting, copy and paste kind of stuff. And stage 2 is a junior stage where we do more data entry, data preparation, kind of data modeling type stuff, filtering, and then of course formulas like lookups, VLOOKUP, if statements, logical statements, all that kind of stuff. In stage 3, we look at pivot tables. So again, this is where the training we saw today comes in. It's one small part of the Excel skills that you'll probably need to get your job done, but a critical part at that. Also look at conditional formatting, charts and dashboards, more advanced aggregation formulas, things like SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, all those kinds of formulas. And then the expert stage is where we look at data reporting with automation with both Power Query, Power Pivot, and even DAX formulas. So definitely more advanced stuff there. We'll look at more automation and data reporting. So all of those stages are divided into short courses with short videos on those topics. So there's a lot of training there, but each of those is divided into just short 5 to 10 minute videos. It just makes it easy to consume the content. You can watch them anytime, come back and watch them. Once you're placed in a specific stage, you don't have to stay there. You can also move around the course and access any of the training. But we just want to make it easy for you to progress through the training to really, again, help you improve your Excel skills. So there's also a community forum involved with this where you can help get your questions answered. You can also help answer other people's questions, other members' questions as well, and meet other members, get to know people. And I really believe this will be a great knowledge base where we can all learn from each other and help get our questions answered and just learn a ton about Excel, because we all have different experiences, we all have different skill sets, and this will be a great place for all of us to learn from each other. Not just me teaching, but everyone learning together. I think that's really the power of a forum and a community like this. So we're also going to do monthly case studies and live Q&A with Elevate. So the case studies will be to solve real world problems based on your questions. So if you have a question on how to create a report, maybe you're not sure how to do some type of financial modeling or something like that, you can post those questions and then I'll do a case study with different ways to solve that problem, because there's always a million ways to solve a problem in Excel. And we'll also do live Q&A meetings to just help get your questions answered. We'll do member spotlights. I have a ton of fun stuff planned for this as well. So what's included? Well, again, here's all the information I just talked about that's included, including the Pivot Ready course bundle. So you're going to get all of this and the Pivot Ready course bundle, which is a $297 value when you join Elevate Excel. And you can join today for just $27 and then $27 a month after that. So this is the initial pricing for Elevate, launching this program for the first time today. And we're going to do this initial offer $27 a month. So here's just a little price table to maybe hopefully make it a little clearer, easier for you to understand. Of course, you can just get the Pivot Ready course bundle if you want to do that for $297, or you can get that plus everything else for just $27 a month. And we also have an annual plan where you can get 2 months free. So you can save 2 months on that if you want to do an annual plan instead. So we've had a ton of great feedback from all of our course members of all of our other courses. I'm super excited to get feedback like this. This is what lights me up. This is what gets me going, because when I hear about people saving time with their job, getting recognized by their boss, becoming that Excel guru, that Excel expert in the office, I just love to hear stories like this because people are just making their lives easier. They're more excited about their jobs, having more fun at their jobs, and just feeling more confident about using Excel and using this tool, really gaining power over Excel instead of going to work feeling like Excel has power over you. Believe me, I've been there, so I know how it feels, and it's great to kind of have this control over Excel, have confidence with it, and also really just get that recognition and help a lot of other people within your organization, within your department, and so on. It's really, really great to do. So to get started, here's the link. It's excelcampus.com/elevate. You can go to that link there. I'll post it in the chat as well. And you can go to that link to get started. You can read more about the course there. And I'm sorry, the program, the Elevate program. You can read more about it there. And join us today. There we go. Just going to put it in the chat. There we go. Okay, there we go. all panelists and all attendees. So yeah, so you can go to that link there to check it out and join us. There we go. Okay. And so when you go to that page, there we go. My slide's gone. When you go to that page, excelcampus.com/elevate. And you'll see this enrollment page here. You can read more about the program, see what's included there. That's the enrollment page for it. And then you can click any of those enroll now buttons, and I'll jump you down to this section of the page where you can pick your package. Again, if you do just want to get the Pivot Ready course bundle, you can do that, or you can join us with Elevate and get that free. You get that Pivot Ready course bundle. You get access to it for free when you join Elevate. Again, just $27 a month. You can cancel at any time. There's no contract or anything like that. Of course, you can feel free to cancel at any time. And we also have that annual plan where you can get 2 months free. So that's the offer there. Hopefully that all makes sense. I try to make it as simple as possible. But once you do that, just click on that green button and that'll take you to our secure registration form. Just fill out simple email address, credit card, and then once you enroll, you'll get immediate access to everything. So those kind of like 3 steps to getting started. You'll first take that assessment to determine where you're at, where your skill set is at. Be completely honest with that. It's totally cool. We're not going to share that with people or judge you or anything like that. It's really just to help you make sure you're progressing at the right level. You're at the right level. You're not overwhelmed with training. A lot of times you might join a course and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed because it might be too advanced, or you might be bored because it's too easy. We don't want either of that for you. We want you to be just at the right place where you're challenging yourself and you're able to practice. Then you'll also be able to join the community where you can ask questions there. I have a video that explains more about that, and get started learning today. Again, the course or courses within this program are all self-paced, and you can access other stages. So if you do want to look at the more advanced stuff, maybe you're working on a project, you need to learn some conditional formatting or something like that, you can definitely jump to that stage and watch those videos, and you're not limited or anything like that. We just want to make sure you're going at the right pace and that. So I hope you can join us. Again, it's a brand new program called Elevate that I'm super excited about. And I really want to help you start on your journey to really master Excel, to save a ton of time with your job, get that recognition from your boss and your coworkers, and just help a lot of other people. That was my journey, or has been my journey in my career. And I really want the same for you. So again, there's that everything with the offer, excelcampus.com/elevate. I put a link there in the chat. You can go check it out and get signed up today. Again, you'll get access to the Pivot Ready course bundle as well, and all that good stuff. So we have a ton of training resources for you to really help you elevate your Excel skills. The whole point there of the name. So I am going to hang around. I know it's top of the hour. Some people, of course, have to drop off. I thank you for hanging around, but I do want to hang around and answer questions. We have a lot of questions. Over 100 questions came in the Q&A, so I'm going to do my best to answer as many as I can. If you have questions about the program, put those in the Q&A box as well. Again, the chat and the Q&A there's 2 buttons at the bottom of Zoom. If you hover your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A button too. And go ahead and put your questions in there, because I want to make sure I can get to your questions and answer as many as I can. Cool. Okay, cool. I just see, yeah, I'm over in the chat. Yeah, I see a lot of thank yous coming in. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited you're here. I love talking about Excel. I talk about it all day, as you might be able to tell. So I'm always excited to have friends, because my wife doesn't, she doesn't use Excel, so she can only listen to about it for so much. Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you all. But yeah, hang out, and I'm going to answer questions too. We'll get into a Q&A. I see we have a ton of questions. Cool. I'm excited to see all these questions. Okay, cool. All right, let's see. Christy, no, my wife likes me. She's, not really Excel. That's hilarious. Thanks, Christy. Carolina wants to know, how long should one stay in the Elevate program? Is there a minimum number of months? No, there's not a minimum number of months. I'd love for you to stay in it for as long as you're using Excel every day at your job or you're using it frequently, because this will not only be just a training a training resource for you to just learn kind of the basics, but every month we're going to have new trainings on new scenarios. I call them like real world case studies. So that could be a project you're working on. It could be something someone else is working on. That'll give you ideas for maybe new solutions. And then of course, I'm also going to be updating the training as new features come out for Excel. Things like Power Query. I mean, for some of us, Power Query's been around since 2010. For some of us, it's the first time we're seeing it today during this webinar. And so things like that, and Microsoft has new tools planned for the future too, of course. So I'm going to continue to update this program with new features. Another one's dynamic array formulas. It's a brand new feature. It just came out on the beta, the Insider Fast Build of Excel. I have a video on it. But things like that will change how we use Excel in the future, different ways to solve problems. There's always 10, 20 ways to solve a problem in Excel, it seems like. And so that's a lot of my skill set, probably a lot of I don't want to say unique skill set, but that's what I like to do and what I'm passionate about doing is figuring out the best way to solve a problem based on the scenario. And so I will definitely offer a lot of that going forward as well. So yeah, there's no minimum in terms of how long you have to stay, but I'd love for you to stay as long as you're using Excel and of course getting benefit from this program. And my whole goal is to give you as much benefit as I possibly can. Yeah. So yeah, and the training today will be recorded. I see that as another question, quite a few questions. I think I said that at the beginning. So let me get into some additional questions here. Again, put those in the Q&A if you can, as we have almost 200 questions. So I'll do my best to just kind of rapid fire through some of these. Others I can take more time to explain. I'm happy to hang out. I know some people will have to drop off, but I'm happy to hang out. No, there's no CPE credit available for the webinar today. Sorry, Michael, I don't have that set up yet. Let's see. Let's do this. I can go through these. Thanks. Okay, let's see. Sandeep wants to know what the defer layout update means in the pivot table field list. So that allows you to modify the pivot table. I'll just show you real quick. That allows you to modify the pivot table without changing the worksheet. This button here. So one thing that you can have with pivot tables is sometimes if you have formulas over here or data or something else to the right, and then you try it, like we'll just put something in there, and then you try and modify the pivot table. Maybe we want to put quarters across the top. We're gonna get this warning message saying there's already data there. Do you want to replace it? And you might want to say you cancel that. We don't want to replace it. So if you defer the layout, then you can make changes to the pivot table. Maybe you want to change some other stuff, make changes, and then hit the update button. Hit the update button and update that layout. So that's what that is there. Yeah, great question. Very observant. All right, cool. Yes, got that one. Okay. Let's see. Vicky had a question about gross margins, positive and negatives with credits. Can I correct that? Yes, most likely, Vicky. Off the top of my head, actually I have that on the list for future blog posts or trainings. So maybe do that in Elevate. So that might be a good one for like a Q&A or a training within Elevate as well. Because I'd have to take a look and see, but most likely it can be fixed somewhere. Sometimes they'll fix it in the source data, and that can be the best place. Sometimes you can fix it in the pivot table too, depending on how those negatives are working. So yeah, great question. Calculated field, calculated item. So calculated fields allow us to create calculations between different fields. Maybe you have actual and budget and you want to do a variance between those. That's calculated field. And then the items are a lower level than that, where you can do calculation between actual items. So for example, on our example here, there we go. we have like these would be items, or these would be items. So maybe we want to do a calculation between the East and Midwest, or group those together. That would be more calculated items. So, and just so you know, that's fairly limited, I'll say, on what type of calculations you can do with calculated fields and calculated items. And those are, again, on the Analyze tab up here, fields, items, and sets, calculated field, calculated item. We have training on that within Elevate and the Pivot Ready course. If you join Elevate, you get the Pivot Ready course as well, and we have more in-depth training on that. So that's fairly limited. I only say that because we now have Power Pivot, which can allow us to do calculations at a much more advanced level. And that's another topic that's covered in Elevate as well in stage 4. So Power Pivot is, we can use DAX, what are called DAX measures, DAX measures, to write formulas against the data model. And the data model will be usually multiple tables of data. So it's extremely powerful stuff. I don't want to overwhelm you or make it sound too complex, but we can do a ton of things with that in terms of more complex reporting. One relatively simple example would be if you have, let's say you have, sales numbers or revenue numbers like this that are based on a daily or sales transactions at this level, and then maybe you have a budget table or some other workbook with budget numbers in it. They're based on monthly numbers, right? You're not breaking it down by day or by transaction. The budget's aggregated at a month, typically a monthly budget, maybe weekly, but something like that. So it's a kind of a different level in terms of time period and transaction. We can use Power Pivot to create a calendar table and a relationship between those two tables, and then create a pivot table with both of those fields. So create a pivot table that compares revenue to budget, even though they come from different sources. So that's kind of a maybe simple, maybe not simple example of something the Power Pivot could do with when we say create relationships between tables. What does that mean? That's something that's probably maybe a little more complex, actually. Another example would be if you wanted to group, let's say you have customers and you want to group them by some other category, maybe the state they're in, their billing, they're like some other subcategory, something like that, or you want to roll up regions, you can have another table that has that roll up or that lookup, and then use Power Pivot for that. So yeah, great question. Okay. Sandeep, I see you have quite a few questions, but I'm just going to get to other ones because I'm sure they'll come up again. But thank you for the questions. I love it. Yeah, Diana, great question. So Diana wants to know if we can have this total here, this chart title, reflect the choices of the slicer. The answer is yes, absolutely. I actually have a post and a video on that that explains how to do that. To if you have multiple choices here, like if you selected multiple items, and this just says multiple items, which doesn't tell you much, but we can actually list out those items. There's a few different ways to do it, and then also make the chart title equal to that. You can just actually, you can do that by just selecting chart title, put an equals here, and then selecting a cell and all that stuff. So yeah, great question. Definitely possible. Let's see. How does the pivot table know what dates go in which quarter? Oh, yeah. So the pivot table has a feature for date grouping, so we can actually group our dates. If we were to move this out, let's move the region out and put the date field in here. We can actually use the pivot table group field feature to group dates by quarters. We can do that instead, and years, and then that would do that grouping there. That's always going to be based on a calendar year, just January through December calendar year. If you're on a fiscal calendar, then you can do something like this, where you have formulas that calculate the quarter based on the date, and you would do that in your source data range. So I have an article on that about the pros and cons to each of those. Yeah, and we cover fiscal quarters and those calculations in the Pivot Ready course too, which again, you get when you join Elevate, you get that as a free course. So yeah, check that out. I know a lot of people are on fiscal calendar, and that can be a point of confusion. So I go into that because I've worked for companies that are on fiscal calendars. And unfortunately, just like Excel just, doesn't have fiscal calendar capabilities built in, which would be great if they did. But at the same time, there's relatively easy workarounds with formulas. Yeah, cool. Okay. Let me get a quick drink here. Let's see. Okay, cool. Yeah, so updating the pivot table is just right-click refresh. I think I explained that during the training. But if you change data in here in the source data range, you can refresh the pivot table. So there's ways to automate that too. You can use a macro to automate that, different ways to automate that. There's also some settings so that when the workbook's opened, you can have it automatically refresh. So if you're sending this out to other people, that's an option too. But if you just go change data, like if you put in, let's just put a big number in here, we will need to right click refresh the pivot table to see that number. Or you can do it from the data tab. Keyboard shortcut is Alt F5 or Control Alt F5 to refresh all. But if there's a drop down here for just refresh, the keyboard shortcut is Alt F5. You can see it right there in the screen tip. That's a good way to learn keyboard shortcuts, by the way. It's a lot of them are in the screen tip right there. You can see to the bottom right of my mouse cursor, right there, Alt F5. Yeah, that's true of everything in the ribbon. Well, not all of them have keyboard shortcuts. Blue screen of death. Sorry to hear that, Don. No, that's not typical for pivot tables. It could be that if you have a lot of data, like hundreds of thousands or over a million rows, that the pivot table might have trouble doing calculations. And in that case, we can use Power Pivot and the data model to report on that data. So there are definitely ways around that if you have really massive data sets. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Bill. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. I probably botched it. I apologize. Yeah, shortcuts for the adding fields. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good keyboard shortcuts to add the fields here, the drag and drop. I've created an add-in called PivotPal that does, I don't know, PivotPal installed. Yeah, that does allow for keyboard shortcuts. Oops, wrong window. Let me open it. That does allow you to use keyboard shortcuts to add the fields. So this is a PivotPal window, and you can use keyboard shortcuts to add the fields. Like if I want to add the year field to the columns area, there's keyboard shortcuts here, which would be like Alt-C for that. And then you can see it's added that to the, added it to the columns area. So this is an add-in I developed called PivotPal, all around pivot tables. And yeah, so, and that's one of the reasons I developed it, because there's not keyboard shortcuts that really allow us to do that very well with just selecting fields here. Yeah, so great question. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that PivotPal add-in will help if that's something you want to do with keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, SSRS reports. Yeah, it's very similar technology there, Joseph, with pivot tables and then like Power Pivot and stuff like that. Yeah, very similar. A lot of, and I should mention that a lot of BI tools, business intelligence tools, something even like Tableau or some of the other popular software that's out there, is all based on this concept that we're looking at with pivot tables. The filter and calculate process that we talked about, that's what Tableau is doing as well with data, or Power BI is Microsoft's business intelligence tool, or any of the other tools you use to do something like this that are not in Excel. The principles here are all the same, which is we're taking a sheet of data like this, long skinny sheet of data, and summarizing it, maybe creating relationships, doing some database work. But that filter and calculate process, very important to understand that concept, especially when you get into more advanced things like Power Pivot and DAX formulas, DAX measures, that kind of stuff. The filter and calculate's absolutely critical to understanding that. And it's also good to understand that for other formulas too, like SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, all those formulas, VLOOKUP, index match, all those kinds of formulas they are all a lot of the times using this kind of vertical tabular layout of data to do those aggregations, to do those calculations. So getting your data in this format, if it's not already tabular format, is very important. That's why I geared the training mostly around that, because of that. It's so critical, such a critical step. Yeah, so great questions. All right, let me go through some questions here. We have so many. I'm sorry, there's well over 200, and there's no way I'm gonna be able to get to them all. I'll try and hang out for another 10-15 minutes or so, because I don't want you to feel obligated to stick around all day. But I'll definitely. Oh, Charles had a question about with Elevate. Do you get PivotPal? Not yet, but that's that's a great suggestion. Yeah, so there's no add-ins included with it yet, but maybe that's a good idea. So we'll see. Yeah, but thank you, Charles. Yeah. Let's see. How to handle Excel dates before 1900? Good question. There are setting for that. I'm not going to come up with the name of it off the top. Yeah, that's a great question. I think Tom. Oh no, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yeah, I can't think of the name of the setting. But really, like, so for people that don't know, the calendar in Excel starts on January 1st, 1900. And that's what you see with dates here. It's just a number, the number of days since January 1st, 1900. If you ever change this date to the general format, you get this number, 42,373. That's the number of days that have elapsed since January 1st, 1900. Some people need to work with dates before 1900. I guess Microsoft feels that that's rare, but I guess it does happen. And there are ways to go about that. I honestly haven't done much with that, so I don't have a good answer. I know there's a setting that you can change, and then there's other solutions for that too. So yeah, but great question. Okay. The stocks tab, that I'm not sure when it's going to be available for everyone. I believe Richard had a question. Oops. About this data types and stocks. These are called rich data types, new feature of Excel. I'm on an Insider's Fast Build, which is available to the public, but it's kind of a beta version of Excel if you're on Office 365. So you might notice like the toolbar up here looks different. I think they're testing out this search up here. I actually don't like that, but yeah. But yeah, with the Insider's Fast Build, you do get some kind of betas, and some things make it, some don't. So data types definitely will make it. I'm not sure when it'll be released to everyone, but it will only be for Office 365 subscribers. I can tell you that much. Or I'm pretty sure. I don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. Cool. Let's see. Some anonymous. Want to know if you've already in the Power BI course and the Power Pivot. I don't have a Power Pivot course. Maybe the Pivot Tables course. So Elevate will still cover a lot beyond the existing courses. If you have one of my existing courses, if you have the Pivot Ready course or the course in another course on the lookup formulas or things like that, Elevate will still cover a lot beyond that. Let me see if I can go back to, there we go. The stages, there we go. Yeah, so we're covering a ton of topics here. Conditional formatting, charts and dashboards. I have a whole new training on charts and dashboards. Data visualization principles I cover in there as well. So we're going to talk about that too. Kind of the basics. We're not going to go crazy on it, but it's good to understand the basics of data visualization. You know, what types of elements should we put on the chart? Should we put the legend on there? Do we need the horizontal axis, the vertical axis? Do we need the grid lines? All that kind of stuff. Those data visualization principles, different types of charts, how to create interactive dashboards on that. A lot of new training here beyond the other courses. Same with DAX formulas. I did a whole new series on Power Pivot and DAX formulas, as well as Power Query. Goes into more depth on Power Query and transforming your data, cleaning it up, automating that process from other systems. Yeah, so a ton of new content here that's not available in any of my other courses. And then we also, of course, are going to have that community forum, which we've never had before. and those Q&As and case studies too. And I'm super excited about this because one thing that I've struggled with in the past is the ability to kind of do this stuff in a way where I can share it with everyone. We get a lot of emails, with specific questions, and then that becomes kind of hidden. The communication becomes hidden in emails. And one, it's, of course, time consuming for us, but two, no one else gets to benefit from that. And so we kind of want to open this up so we can really build a community here that everyone can benefit from this knowledge from each other. Because I have specific knowledge, specific skill sets and experiences. You do as well. I want to learn from you. You want to learn from everyone else too. And so that's the whole goal here. That's the whole point of this, is just a place where we can all really learn from each other. So yeah, hope that makes sense. And thank you for the question. Yeah, PivotPal. Jennifer wants to know about PivotPal. That is one of our add-ins. You can go to excelcampus.com/add-ins or the excelcampus.com homepage and go to add-ins to check out more about PivotPal. Yeah, that seems like a popular one. Just going through the questions here. So sorry if you hear a few pauses. Going through the questions also, giving my voice a little break. Can pivot tables reference formatting categories? Sorry, Jerome, I'm not exactly sure what you mean on that one. But if you want to follow up, we can definitely, I'm not gonna be able to get to all the questions today. Let's see. Yeah, so if you add, Barbara wants to know, can pivot table recognize additional fields added to my spreadsheet? Yes, so that again goes back to a table. So great question, Barbara. Again, if you use an Excel table as a source of your pivot table, if you add new columns, or what we're calling fields in the pivot table, if you add a new column here, maybe for example, let's just do one. I'm just gonna hit Control+ here a few times to insert columns. So that's a keyboard shortcut there. Select the column, Control+. Let's say we did, unit price, right? Something like that. And then we have now equals this divided by this. Boom. So first of all, I'm using an Excel table. So as you saw, I typed the formula once and hit enter. It copied it down automatically for me. So there's a benefit of a table. Let's just fix this number just so it's not sticking out. And auto fit that. So now we've added a new column. Since we're using an Excel table as a source of the pivot table, all we have to do now is just right-click refresh our pivot table, and our new field will be included. It's unit prices right here. Now we can use it. We can go report on it. Let's move year out of there. We can go report on it. Maybe we want, instead of sum of revenue, we want sum of unit price, or sum of unit price. Might not be as interesting maybe as average unit price, and then of course we might want that by product instead of by date, something like that, right? Let's clear the filter there. So you can see just the flexibility here with the pivot table, like that report alone. I mean, if you think about doing the setup work to list these out, writing the formulas there with average if would be the formula. If you put quarters across the top, then we'll need average ifs, plural. So you could see with the pivot table there, and then also the insights you get. I mean, this is, fake data, but okay, product 6 is obviously kind of lower average unit price than the rest of them. So, but back to your point, or your question, Barbara, is that, yeah, when you use an Excel table for the source of the pivot table, the new fields are going to be automatically included. If you were to use a regular range and just, again, select that data, then when you add a new column, you have to go in here and modify this column letter with the new column. So instead of D, that's going to go out to J, or instead of I, that's going to go to J. And you might forget to do that step. So, yeah. So great question, though. Such a good question. So use Excel tables. That's my 2 cents. Barbara. Okay, cool. Yeah. Good question. Ian, I don't have a separate seminar on Power Query yet, but that might be next on the list for sure. I know a lot of people today probably saw it for the first time, and it's like, confusion versus with excitement. If that's you, I'm not trying to offend you or anything, because when I saw it for the first time, I was like, wow, this is cool, but I don't get it. Or, it's like, there's a lot to it, right? It's a new window. It's like new ribbon. So yeah, I'll probably do another one of those. And of course, within Elevate, we have a whole module dedicated to Power Query training as well, starting with a very intro of the basics and all that stuff. So yeah, great question. Yeah, so if you have Office 365, Tony, it will, Power Pivot, you don't see Power Pivot. You have to enable it. And you can do that if you have the developer tab. You can enable it from the developer tab, COM add-ins, and it's this one here, Power Pivot. Yeah. So I went through that quick, but I know Microsoft has a help page for that as well. If you just Google it for Office 365, they've hidden it from you. They've also hidden the developer tab, so you have to enable the developer tab for that what route to go about it. But hopefully that'll help get you started. Okay. Yeah, so Sandy wants to know about converting dates from text to dates or numbers. Yeah, you have to select the whole column when you do that. Let me check. Let me go over here to the, oops, sorry about that. Yeah, you have to select all the cells here when you do that conversion. And well, I already converted that to a table. But if that typically won't be a table. I mean, if it is, a keyboard shortcut there is Control Space to select the entire column, even if it's not a table. And then when you use Control Space like that, you can scroll back up, and you'll typically see this box at the top where you can do Convert to Number to convert them all. Yeah. And again, if that cleanup work is part of a larger process, we can use, I was going to say I'm going to encourage you to use Power Query, but I'm not going to do that yet, because if it's first time seeing pivot tables and stuff, I don't want to overwhelm you with Power Query too. But there's different ways to go about that, and we can use Power Query for that specific step right there too. So like all the 8 steps that I cover in that cheat sheet I'm going to send you, those could be done with Power Query too. Yeah, so there's different ways to go about it. Those transformations, depending on the process. And that's, again, something we're going to talk about in Elevate with the case studies, is the process. Because a lot of times what we do with our jobs is this same stuff over and over again every week or every month. And we want to be able to automate as much of that as we can with the tools at hand to do so. And there's now a lot of good tools in Excel that can help us with that, and just save time from doing those manual tasks. Because those are the time-consuming things that we hate. Like, I'll be honest, I hate doing that stuff. I'll speak for myself. And it's not fun. It's not creative. It's not exciting. And it doesn't allow us to, we're just not wasting time, but we're spending time doing that when we could be doing other things. And maybe that just means a free weekend for you, or not a late night at the office. Those are the kinds of things that I really want to help you with. To save that time. To me, those make like kind of the biggest impact on your daily life at work, or have for me. And you can open yourself up for more opportunity when you have more time to do that. So yeah, that's my rant on that. CJ, if you have Excel 2010 Power Pivot, you'll have to download and install it. It's still a free add-in, but you have to download and install it. And same with Power Query. So, and I have an article on that, Power Query on how to get it for Excel 2010 or 2013. And yes, the training, the courses, Elevate, the Pivot Ready course, will all be applicable to any version of Excel. So, if for the Power Query training, it's going to be Excel 2010 and later. I hope that most people now are on Excel 2010 and later. And the training will be applicable to any version of Excel. If you're on the Mac, the Power Query is not yet available for the Mac version of Excel. Same with Power Pivot. So that's just an unfortunate drawback. If you've seen Power if you see Power Query today and you're like, I need that, but I'm on the Mac, one thing you can do is run Parallels or Boot Camp, which are what are called virtualization softwares that allow you to run Windows on your Mac. It's super cool. I've used it before on a Mac. But then you can run Windows on your Mac, and it looks just like you're running Windows, and run the Windows version of Excel. And then you have the best of everything. You have both systems on one machine. So that's one way to go about it. Yeah, so definitely check that out. Parallels, here, it's like, I think it's parallels.com, but it's plural, Parallels. And it's, you'll see, it's relatively inexpensive, probably under $100. And if you're on a Mac and you just want these tools that Microsoft's releasing for Windows only, some of the new features and stuff, definitely check that out as an option for you. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's see. I'll answer a few more questions. I see there's a ton. I'm going to go through them and see if I can maybe do some kind of follow-up if we have some of the similar questions, things I missed, because we still have over 235 open questions, and there's just no way I'm gonna be able to get to all of them, and I don't want you to have to sit here and feel like you have to hang out. So I apologize if I didn't get to your question. So that's my whole point there. Bree, good question. Can you filter the rows instead of just at the filters area? Yes. So back to our pivot table over here. Before we had the product, let's say, I'll just put the region in the filters area, and up here we can filter the entire pivot table for a specific region. But you can there's also a filter drop down menu here for the rows, and then you can apply a filter to the rows. So if you just want to see products 1 and 2 here, you can do that as well. And the other thing too with that is if you have multiple fields in the rows area, so now I have product and region here, when you hit this drop down, you'll now see just the products down here. And then right up here, there's now this new drop down that allows you to select the field. So if we want to see region and do sorting or filtering by the region, now we could come down here and say we only want those 2, but we still want to see all the products. So yeah, great question, Bree. That's the way to go about it. And it changes a bit depending on the layout. So when you go to the design tab of the ribbon, over here, there's different layouts for the pivot table. So you can the default is compact form, but you can change it to something that looks more like this, more of a tabular form. You can decide if you want subtotals here or not. So a lot of things you can do, and a lot of those features are right here. So definitely play with those too. The subtotals, grand totals, turning them on or off, all that stuff. Adding blank rows below. So a lot of cool stuff you can do. But then with that, like the drop downs get their own columns when it's a different layout. So yeah, and those are specific there. So yeah, great question though. Sorry, my mouse bounces off the screen. It's because I'm going over to my other screen to look at the questions and mark them off. Yeah, Paul has a good question about customizing the slicer contents for period and month, like quarter, month, or something like that. You could absolutely do that. And one way to do that is to just modify or create a separate column in the source data range for whatever that is, whatever you want to have there. You can create a column where that makes sense, because that'll be somewhat of a grouping here. So maybe it's year and quarter. You want to do something like that. So you can filter that all at the same time. You can just you could do something like this, like year, and then we'll put a dash there, and then the quarter, something like that. So we'd have a new column that looks like that. We'll call it year, quarter. Just kind of doing this on the fly. Refresh our pivot table. We could go then Analyze tab and insert a slicer, or this is also on the insert menu. And then we have our new year, quarter slicer. So now we got, so that's a cool one too, because if you that becomes a one-click operation if you're looking at it by quarter, something like that. So now you don't have to apply 2 filters, you just apply 1. Of course, if you have a lot of data, then that might be kind of long. But yeah, sky's the limit with that. And I call these helper columns. These are what I typically refer to as helper columns that might contain a formula. I talk more about those in Elevate as well, in terms of creating these different helper columns for different groupings. And again, you see here that we have a lot of repeating values, and that's awesome for the source data of a pivot table. Pivot table likes that because the pivot table is good at creating a list of unique values and then doing aggregations on that. That's kind of the whole thing with a pivot table. You could rename, a pivot table is kind of a mysterious word for a lot of people. It definitely was for me when I first heard about them. In terms of like, what does that do? To explain it, to rename it to something else, you might need a whole sentence of words to explain what it does and give it a good name. Amazing reporting tool. I don't know. Maybe we can have a contest and come up with a better name. But yeah, so there's a lot we can do. That's a great question, Paul. Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, let me do a few more questions. Malcolm wants to know that sometimes tables look similar to formatted like ranges. How do I know I'm looking at a table? Great question. So this is an Excel table here. When you select any cell inside, there's a few ways to know. First of all, when you select a cell inside the pivot, inside the table, the design tab will appear on the ribbon right here on the right side. If you're using an older version of Excel, the ribbon tabs look better than this. This is a new modern design from Microsoft, but this is the design tab. I'm not going to go into that. So you'll see the design tab up there. So just visual cue there. If I select this cell, design tab disappears. Select this cell, design tab appears. That's one way. The other way is at the very bottom of the table. Oh, another way too is when I scrolled there, you'll see that the headers of the table now are in the column headers here. And so instead of seeing column letters, we actually see the header of the table, even though the table is not in row 1. Doesn't start in row 1. So as I scroll down, those now convert, which is really a really handy feature. The filters are also there as well. So I don't have to scroll all the way back up. I don't have to freeze my rows for the table. These are all like tiny little handy features that just make your life easier every day. So that's another way. And then finally, at the very bottom of the table, you can see that hopefully you can see it. I know it's tough to see on some screens, but there's a little blue kind of arrow there at the bottom right of the table. And even if you change the formatting or change it to none, that little blue arrow will still be there. So now I have a table, but I format it to none. So it's like, how could I tell this is a table? That's one way. And then at the very bottom, there's also a total row. And that total row is right here where we can do aggregation, sum, count on the column. And that can be turned on and off from the design tab right here. You can turn that on or off. And when you turn it off, you'll still see that little blue arrow down there at the bottom right of the table. So yeah, but good question. That's all, really good stuff in terms of how you see it. But again, use tables. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, Sherry, I think I answered your question. That seemed to be a common question about what else does Elevate cover. I think I answered that too. But if not, definitely shoot us an email and follow up there, and we'll let you know. But really, like I said, the ongoing training is going to be, I think, exciting for everyone. The community forum, and then we have a lot of additional training beyond just our existing courses. Yeah. And again, if you want to get signed up, the link is excelcampus.com/elevate. Also send out an email with that link and the replay, a link to the replay as well, today's replay, and all the files that I used today too, or that Excel file I used, that example file. I'll send you that along with the cheat sheet that shows you the 8 steps and the areas diagram and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to end it there because I'm kind of losing my voice. But I hope this has been helpful to you. And of course, we'd love to have you join us for Elevate, and you'll get the Pivot Ready course bundle for free. When you do that, get access to the Pivot Ready course and the course on Power Query and the intro to Power Pivot and all that stuff. So we have a ton of training for you, but we want to make it easy for you too. So we're going to give you that clear success path and for where you need to start and really help you progress your Excel skills. So I'm super excited about it. I hope you are too. And I'm glad you hung out today. I hope you learned a lot about pivot tables. And my ultimate just suggestion is to really practice this with pivot tables and take some time to practice and really start learning these, because it'll really, really help you with your job and just progress in your career and save you a ton of time in the process. So cool. Yeah, thank you. And again, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. We just had so many. We have well over 1,000 people on today's training. And I'm excited to have you. So thanks again. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.